So getting started with your sketchbook cover, make sure that you draw some sort of border around the outside. This way your shapes and design can fit within it and look nice. Definitely use a ruler or a straight edge to do that. And then remember to break up your sketchbook cover into sections. So I would start out with just a big zigzag across the page or a swirl, something simple, and then continue to just break that up into smaller sections. So if you did a zigzag, maybe you could add some triangles in different places or do more zigzags coming off of it. But be creative, think about breaking it up into a good amount of sections, and then begin choosing sections to add your designs to. You can see right now I'm adding the same design into a couple of the sections, and the purpose of this is to keep everything unified. So it's a good idea to repeat your designs as you go. I would space them out though, so don't make the exact same design right next to the same shape that you just used. So space it out like I'm doing here so that again they don't all blend together. Another way to add more shapes or add more space once you divide your sections up is to just outline your shapes. So here you'll see that I have outlines around a lot of what I'm doing, such as right here where I have that bigger triangle around the smaller triangle. So you can go around the shapes that you already created. But now I'm going in with a fish scale design, which I am going to put in a few places so we can watch the progress there. And then you can feel free to jump around too. Like right here, my hand got a little sore putting those fish scales together, so I jumped around to some different shapes and then came back to the fish scale design. The other thing you want to keep in mind is spacing. Right here, my circles and fish scale kind of blend together, and you'll see later I go around this with a Sharpie to separate them, but it wouldn't have been a bad idea to outline and leave a little bit of a space between where I have these circles and where the fish scale is. So maybe consider outlining again around the outside of some of these shapes. So now I'm going in with another new design here. Be creative, maybe try Google searching Zentangle designs or look back at the ones you practiced and pick out your favorites to repeat. But come up with some really interesting designs that look different from some of the other shapes and designs that you already did on your Zentangles. All right, so you'll see here that I am using the thicker side of the Sharpie to outline some of the shapes that maybe don't stand out as much. This would be a good idea to do. You could maybe outline some of those first lines that you started with, or even choose just a few areas to go in with the thicker Sharpie. And then you can kind of come back and do it again if you find other areas that might blend in a little bit. But here's where I'm outlining and leaving that little bit of a gap in between. So I decided to go back because a lot of my shapes started blending together. So to have that little bit of an edge will really help to make things stand out. So I finished adding all of my designs here. You'll notice that I have a few large areas that are left blank, and that's okay. That's where I would go back with your additional techniques of adding either shading with a pencil, or maybe you could do some shading with even the Sharpie, and then I'm going in with some watercolor paint as well. Now I would recommend watercolor just because it's a little bit lighter so it still is see-through, so you can still see some of the lines that you created with the watercolor, so it's not going to completely cover some of the work that you did. You could either go in with filling everything in solid, or like what I did with this big shape here, I faded the color from dark to light. So that's something that you could practice first if you haven't yet, if you're considering doing that. You'll also notice in these two areas with the red, I just went right over my shapes. So that's again the nice thing about watercolor is that you can see right through it. And then consider doing something with your border. So here I'm just using the watercolor, painting around the border, just to tie everything together and make sure it's unified. And same thing, I faded it into just the plain background just to give it a little bit of value change to make it more interesting. So be creative with these. If you do choose to use paint or color, try to keep it simple. So maybe just choose two or three uh, and make sure you're repeating them throughout so that they're not all just red in one spot and then purple in another. So space it out, move things around, and try to keep it unified.